Welcome to The Gimmick. Tonight we jump directly into our main story, Tony Khan, a man who answers the question, what would happen if a chronically online pro wrestling fan had $1 billion? This week has been an interesting one for the co-owner and president of All Elite Wrestling. From Khan taking his first televised bump on Wednesday in a shocking ending to AEW's Dynamite, to Thursday in a surprising display of kayfabe, or the belief that pro wrestling is real, Khan was seen sporting a neck brace from the attack of the previous night on the NFL draft. For those who don't know, Tony Khan is the senior president of football and analytics for the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team his father owns. I'm sure those facts are mutually exclusive from one another. And by all accounts, Tony Khan was seeming to get pretty positive responses from the internet wrestling community. And I have to say, that is a shock to see. Because anytime Tony Khan usually does anything, such as sign a new wrestler, do an interview, or continue breathing, a subset of the internet wrestling population wants him to be tried in the international courts. But it was an interview on Friday with the NFL Network that would bring the goodwill to a screeching halt when Khan decided to make this analogy about a corporate rival, the WWE.
And we're up against a really evil juggernaut. WWE is our competitor. That's who we're facing. AEW, like the Pepsi of pro wrestling. WWE's like the Harvey Weinstein of pro wrestling.
Ah, yes. The generational soft drink debate of Pepsi versus Harvey Weinstein. I don't know about you, but I really hate when I go to a restaurant and I ask for a Diet Pepsi and the server tells me they only serve Weinstein products. I guess in that case, I'll have an AirBud. For those who don't know, Harvey Weinstein is an American film producer of such movies as the aforementioned Air Bud, but is now more recently known as a convicted sex offender. Harvey Weinstein was accused and convicted of casting couch behavior and outright sexual assault in Hollywood. Weinstein was the focal point of the Me Too movement. And now, let me be clear, I know what Tony was going for here. Earlier this year, a lawsuit was filed in the state of Connecticut against Vince McMahon and the WWE in regards to some behaviors that were similar to the ones Harvey Weinstein was engaging in. That, coupled with many first-hand reports of the WWE's own casting couch culture, has brought this case to the point where the federal authorities are involved. And what WWE and Vince McMahon are being accused of is truly horrific, but this isn't the way to get your message across. Using a traumatic experience as a punchline for a misdirection joke is low. With this topic hitting headlines and Tony Khan seeming to become an on-screen character in the world of pro wrestling, I think it's time we learn a little bit about the man who Eric Bischoff can't seem to stop talking about and look at some of the criticisms Tony Khan faces from the internet wrestling community and whether they're warranted. Born Anthony Khan on October 10th, 1982 in the Champaign region of Illinois, to parents Ann Carlson and Shahid Khan. A quick aside on his father Shahid. He was born in Lahore, Pakistan, 3 years after the partition in India in 1950. At the age of 16, Shahid moved to the United States to attend college in Illinois. While he was in college, he worked for a company called Flex in Gate, a company Shahid would later go on to purchase and start supplying bumpers for an automotive giant called Toyota. Not sure I've heard of them. By the year of 1989, Flex and Gate would be the sole bumper supplier for that young upstart Toyota's line in North America. A pretty good example of the American dream, if I say so myself. But let's get back to Tony. Tony has stated in interviews he got into pro wrestling the way a lot of us do. Well, of course, by the action-adventure series The A-Team and the G.I. Joe animated cartoon. Tony said he was a television kid growing up, and he saw Hulk Hogan, who frequently guest starred on the A-Team as himself, of course he did, and the animated version of Sergeant Slaughter, who was a mainstay on the G.I. Joe cartoon. It wasn't until a young Tony saw an advertisement for pro wrestling that saw Hulk Hogan and Slaughter being advertised. When you think about it, that is a hilarious way to get into pro wrestling. Here are two characters from two different shows. One's animated, and now they're both real people on a different program, one fighting a man who looks like a cartoon character came to life, while Sergeant Slaughter was fighting a man who looks like he and your father share mustache secrets. Tony, like most of us, was hooked the very first time he saw pro wrestling. It would become a lifetime obsession. Tony said as a child he would book matches in his head, and as the 90s started, Tony began tape trading. For those who may not be aware, before the prevalence of the internet, wrestling fans would trade physical VHS tapes in the mail. It was basically post office YouTube, but instead of a carefully chosen algorithm based off your viewing habits, your recommended videos were based off what tapes some guy named Jeff had in his studio apartment in Burbank. Into the 2000s, and Tony would later on go to University Laboratory High School, which for the record sounds completely made up, but upon further research, it is indeed a real school who has some very notable alumni, such as 3 Nobel Prize winners, a former policy advisor to Hillary Clinton, as well as their crowning achievement, and this is real, season 9 winner of RuPaul's Drag Race, Sasha Velour. After high school, Tony attended a public university, the University of Illinois, where he got his bachelor's in finance. Now, in this part of Tony's life, there is not a lot of pro wrestling, so let's just hit some of the highlights. In 2012, Tony started working for the Jacksonville Jaguars after his father buys the team, as we had previously discussed. In 2015, Tony buys a company called True Media Networks, a sports and data analytics company with a client list of ESPN, the NFL, and 60% of all Major League Baseball teams. Basically, they provide sports data to people who probably stuff mathletes into lockers in high school. In 2017, Tony was named vice chairman and director of football operations for Fulham, an English soccer team. Now, back to pro wrestling. In 2018, Tony Khan said that he had a viable business case to start a pro wrestling company. Citing the increasing rise in media rights deals for pro wrestling, Tony basically sat through the entire 2010s WWE, ran some numbers, and said, "Hold my beer." Tony's father would go on to invest $100 million in the new upstart, which would be known as AEW, or All Elite Wrestling. In an interview with Forbes magazine, Khan said the bread and butter of AEW would be the TV rights deals, as they were fetching hundreds of millions of dollars for his competition, with the revenue of touring and pay-per-view and merchandise all being secondary sources of income. Khan luckily had a friend and then president of TBS and TNT, and after what Khan described as being put through the ringer, AEW was given a 6-figure-a-week allocation from TBS and TNT. AEW was officially off the ground, but now this money wasn't enough to sustain AEW long term. Good thing he had that seed money from his father, because Tony Khan had already signed many wrestlers to guaranteed contracts worth millions of dollars. And it wasn't long after this that AEW signed a new deal with TBS and TNT for over $170 million. Since its inception, Tony Khan has not been a character on the weekly TV shows. Occasionally, he does show up to give an announcement or to announce that there's going to be an announcement next week, but he's not been an on-screen character up until this week, despite certain parts of the internet wrestling community saying he's the face of AEW, citing his social media usage. Now, do I think Tony Khan tweeting makes Tony Khan the main character of All Elite Wrestling? No, I don't. Main characters usually get dialogue that doesn't make them look like they're reading an advertisement at the threat of having their puppy taken away. But it seems that Tony may be stepping out from behind the curtain and into the spotlight. And as we mentioned earlier, Tony was a part of an on-screen attack from Jack Perry in the Elite, which the IWC promptly complained about because the Meltzer driver that he was given was too safe and his head was too far from the mat, which is a strange complaint. I thought we wanted safe professional wrestling, or do we not? Do we have to talk about the Darby Allin thing again? Do you want safe wrestling or do you not want safe wrestling? We have to pick a lane. Anyways, This brings me to the last section of this video. I want to discuss 3 big criticisms of Tony Khan I see on almost a daily basis making professional wrestling content. We're going to look at what's said, and then we're going to examine them with some of the facts. And if you're asking yourself, am I going to cover that one criticism that you're thinking of? Yeah, I am. I know a lot of folks online like to claim Tony enjoys bumps, and I'm not just talking the ones in the wrestling ring, but I want to come out and say right now, I don't think it's substances that causes him to be the way that he is. That wild look in his eye is more akin to asking that one kid in your elementary class about their favorite dinosaur or trying to start a conversation with Joe Rogan about cold plunges. Wrestling seems to be Tony's hyperfixation, and there's no secrets in the world of pro wrestling. If Tony Khan was more akin to Tony Montana, we probably would have had proof by now. The next criticism is Tony can't book wrestling, and honestly, I think this one comes down to personal taste. I enjoy what he's doing with the stories that AEW is telling. Unlike this user who says AEW does not have storylines, I want to confirm that AEW does indeed have storylines. But we have to consider, to Tony's own admission, he had never booked a single show of pro wrestling before that first AEW show in 2019. His booking has been able to impress the likes of Cody Rhodes, who had this to say.
He's a prime example. You don't have to be a wrestler to know our business. He was a lifelong fan. He studied it. He studied the business of it and the creative of it. And every idea he's ever presented to me, it's been great.
Tony was a fan who said he could do it better. And I think we've all done that at some point. I think the only difference between us and him is we don't have $100 million seed money from the bumper king of North America. But this next fact, depending on your feelings about the Tokyo Dome, may or may not mean much to you. But Tony Khan was named Booker of the Year of 2020, 2021, and 2022 by the Wrestling Observer newsletter. With his booking, AEW has gone from one show a week to 3 wrestling shows weekly on TBS and TNT, and even a reality show as well. And say what you will about some of the storylines, but those additional shows and hours of content are a vote of confidence from the networks. The last critique I want to talk about is Khan's internet usage. He's a nerdy wrestling fan who grew up as the internet was becoming prevalent in the United States. Are we really surprised by his Twitter rants? I think it's funny to see thread after thread about Khan's latest Twitter outbursts being filled with people who are having a meltdown into what amounts to a parasocial relationship with a pro wrestling booker. The amount of people who have no self-awareness in the IWC is astounding. Tony seems to be doing what we'd all be doing if we had that type of funds. By that, I mean booking pro wrestling the way we want to see it. And maybe that's why I see a lot of the criticisms of Tony as odd, as we would all be in the same boat if we were automotive parts royalty. I can tell you, if I was in his position, I would be on Twitter too yelling about pro wrestling. Hell, I'd probably book an entire musical episode to watch Jim Cornette's mind fold in on itself. But much like Tony Khan, I could see people claiming that I'm on substances too. And I'm not here to say whether I would or I wouldn't be if I was in his situation. I'm just saying there might be signs. But as we're wrapping up, I really want to turn back to Tony's comments. I'm seeing a lot of people in the IWC upset about Tony's comments, saying they're not going to watch AEW or give them support based on his joke. And I understand that. But if you're going to keep that energy for him making the joke, I need you to keep the same energy for the company who's actually responsible for the horrible things. Thank you so much for watching this and everything here at Suplex Media. My name's Michael. This has been The Gimmick. And remember, pro wrestling is predetermined. Your life isn't. Go do something great today.